In 334 BC, a 22-year-old king from the rugged highlands of Macedon stepped onto Asian soil with roughly 40,000 soldiers and a vision that bordered on impossible. His name was Alexander, but we know him as Alexander the Great. This is because he single-handedly forged an empire stretching from Greece to Egypt and deep into India, spanning more than 2 million square miles in just a decade. His army marched an estimated 20,000 miles, which is nearly equal to the circumference of the Earth. The mighty Persian Empire, built over generations, collapsed before him in just a handful of campaigns. But how did one man conquer so much so quickly? Was it brilliance, inheritance, luck, or the weakness of his enemies? To answer that, we must go to the start of his journey. Alexander's story begins in the shadow of his father, Philip II of Macedon, a man who did not simply rule Macedon, but reinvented how wars were fought. Before Philip, Macedon was not a military power of Greece. Its soldiers were mostly part-time farmers called up during war. Philip changed that. He turned these farmers into a professional standing army, paid in regular coin and drilled year-round. The heart of this new army was the phalanx. The formation itself was not new. Greek city-states had used it for centuries. But Philip transformed it by making his soldiers carry the sarissa, a massive pike nearly 18 feet long instead of short spears. When these men stood shoulder to shoulder, they could extend their sarissas beyond the front line to an enemy facing them, with each soldier's shield slightly overlapped the next, protecting his comrade. Yet Philip understood a crucial truth. A wall can hold, but it cannot conquer alone. So he built the second half of his system, the companion cavalry. These were elite horsemen, heavily armed, fast, and trained to strike with precision. While the phalanx pinned the enemy in place, the cavalry would circle to the flanks or punch through weak points. This became known as the hammer and anvil tactic, with the phalanx being the anvil and cavalry the hammer. Young Alexander absorbed these lessons early. Tutored by Aristotle, he studied Homer's Iliad and the heroics of Achilles. He was also deeply impressed by stories of Cyrus the Great and Hercules. These influences shaped how he saw himself as heir to the likes of Achilles and Zeus, destined for glory and divinity. When Philip was assassinated in 336 BC, the 20-year-old Alexander inherited crisis. Greek city-states like Thebes, sensing a weakness in leadership, openly rebelled. Alexander responded with killer intent and ruthless precision, that too at an astonishing speed, covering nearly 240 miles in just 2 weeks. Before the Greeks fully grasped what was happening, Alexander besieged and stormed the city, leveling it to the ground as a warning to anyone who thought about rebellion. 6,000 people were killed and thousands more were sold into slavery. With Greece subdued and rebellion crushed in a single decisive blow, Alexander turned toward Asia, confident that no dagger waited behind him. In 334 BC, Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Asia Minor. Legend says he cast a spear into the soil, claiming the continent as Spear One land. The Persian Empire, ruled by Darius III, dwarfed Macedon in territory and manpower. Yet empires can be vast and brittle at the same time. The first real test came at the Granicus River. Persian cavalry waited on the opposite bank, positioned on higher ground, ready to strike as soon as the Macedonians tried to cross. Alexander didn't wait. He charged straight into the river with his cavalry fighting through mud, current, and enemy blades to defeat the Persian army completely. Following this encounter, cities like Sardis surrendered without a fight. At Gordium, he confronted the famous Gordian knot, an intricate tangle said to determine Asia's future ruler. Instead of untying it, Alexander sliced through it with his sword, fulfilling the prophecy in his own audacious way, further amplifying his legend. Alexander faced Darius III for the first time at Issus in 333 BC. Darius commanded an army twice in size compared to Alexander. Instead of trying to destroy the entire Persian army, he targeted its heart. As Alexander's cavalry cut through the lines and began pushing toward Darius, panic spread, with Darius turning and fleeing away from the battlefield. Without leadership, the massive Persian force collapsed, and what had begun as a contest of numbers ended in decisive Macedonian victory. After Issus, Alexander moved south along the Mediterranean coast to neutralize the Persian navy by capturing its supply bases and ports. Most cities surrendered, but Tyre refused. The city sat on an island roughly half a mile offshore, protected by high walls and a powerful fleet. Since Alexander lacked enough ships to launch a direct naval assault at first, he ordered the construction of a massive causeway from the mainland to the island, changing it into a peninsula. It took 7 months to complete the causeway, after which roughly 8,000 Tyrians were killed in the fighting, and around 30,000 were sold into slavery. Tyre was subdued, and with it, Persian naval power in the eastern Mediterranean was effectively broken. Following Tyre, Alexander proceeded towards Egypt, where he was welcomed as liberator and crowned pharaoh. There he founded Alexandria, a city that would one day house the greatest library of the ancient world. In 331 BC came Gaugamela, the battle that ended Persia. Facing perhaps 5 times his numbers, Alexander started moving towards the left in order to stretch Persian lines. When a gap opened, he drove his cavalry into the heart of Darius's formation. Some sources also quote that Alexander threw a spear at Darius, which he narrowly escaped from. Facing Alexander once again, Darius fled, with Alexander formally getting crowned as the king of Persia and entering Babylon. Alexander did not stop after defeating Persia's armies. He pursued Darius III deep into the eastern provinces, determined to end the fight between kings face to face. But before that meeting could happen, Darius was betrayed and murdered by his own satrap, Bessus. When Alexander found the fallen king's body, he covered it with his cloak and ordered a royal funeral according to Persian custom, an act of respect, but also a political declaration. By honoring Darius, Alexander positioned himself as Persia's rightful successor. Bessus declared himself heir to Darius, forcing Alexander to march into Bactria and Sogdia to eliminate the rival claim. Bessus was soon betrayed by his own men, captured, and executed, securing Alexander's position as Persia's rightful successor. But the region did not submit quietly. Instead of open battles, Alexander faced guerrilla resistance, ambushes, and shifting loyalties. He adapted by dividing his forces into mobile units and building fortified settlements to secure key positions. At the Jaxartes River, he used artillery to counter fast-moving nomadic horsemen, showing that his success was no longer just about the phalanx. Conquest, however, required more than military control. To secure loyalty among the local elites and stabilize the region, Alexander married Roxana, the daughter of a powerful Bactrian noble. He adopted Persian dress and court rituals, encouraged intermarriage between Macedonians and Persians, and elevated Persian officers into positions of authority. To some, this was unity. To others, betrayal. The strain became personal when, in a drunken quarrel, Clitus the Black, the officer who had once saved his life, was killed. Regret followed, but so did distance. The conqueror who once led from the front began drifting into isolation. Still, he pressed east. In 327 BC, he crossed the Hindu Kush into India. At the Hydaspes River, he defeated King Porus despite war elephants and monsoon rains, using a surprise crossing to outmaneuver him. Impressed by Porus' courage, Alexander restored him as ruler. Another example of calculated incorporation rather than destruction. But ambition met exhaustion. At the Hyphasis River, his army refused to march farther, forcing Alexander to return. The return through the Gedrosian desert was disastrous, costing thousands of lives. Soon after, in 323 BC, at just 32 years old, Alexander the Great died in Babylon. The cause of death is not known. Some say it was fever, while some say it was the cumulative toll of wounds and exhaustion. Without him, the empire he had carved out unraveled almost instantly in the wars of the successors. Yet his influence did not diminish. Greek language and ideas spread across 3 continents. Cities he founded became centers of trade, science, and culture. East and West, once divided by suspicion, were drawn into lasting contact. The political map fractured, but the cultural transformation endured. He did not merely conquer territory, he reshaped the imagination of power. He proved that a single generation, driven by relentless ambition, can redraw the boundaries of the known world.